Let the good WCW times roll. Hooray! Cliches, all that jazz, whatever. Whoop-a-doo. I have no idea what I'm saying anymore. I'm Joe Rentham with every WCW pay-per-view main event ranked from worst to best, part 4. 3 had a few more rants than I expected, so this is going to be a 6-part series. Because I still have 62 more entrants to talk about. Now, things are going to get a little bit more praiseworthy as we get into the rest of this video, and especially for parts 5 and 6. Now, thank you guys very much for the feedback. I really do appreciate it. It's been a whole lot of fun, and this was a list that was a massive undertaking. Really, because trying to rank 113 pay-per-view main events is really goddamn hard, even with as much WCW as I've watched. Because there's been some great, and there's been some shit, and from 1983 all the way to 2001, it has definitely been an up and down pendulum battle, if you will. So, number 62. Hogan versus Vader steel cage match for the WCW Championship Super Brawl 5. Look, let me just be honest. The Hogan-Vader feud just never worked for me. It wasn't bad. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. But it was obvious that Vader was never going to beat Hogan. And that's the problem. If Hogan had actually lost to Vader, if Vader had, beaten him for the championship for a few months and then dropped it back to Hogan, I would have been okay with that. But no, Hogan had to have his 15-month title reign ended in controversial fashion, taking over Randy Savage's, reign when he won at World War III 95. And even though he wouldn't win it again until, Road Wild 96 from the Giant, they decided to just basically keep Hogan in the goddamn spotlight. And it was always a Hogan show, and people wondered why fans were getting tired of him by this point. Because there were a lot of people cheering for Vader here. Now, it wasn't necessarily as bad as when Hogan and Giant took on each other at the following Super Brawl, where fans were booing Hogan a lot. But with this, people did want Vader to win, and he didn't. They decided to do, goofy shit with, Flair to lead to the strap match that would happen a little bit later, the following pay-per-view that would, basically end up with Flair being drugged to all 4 corners instead of Vader, despite Vader being the participant in the match. Sometimes they work together, decently at least, and sometimes there were a few good moments, but with this, it just felt like it was kind of just there. I don't know, it just felt like a lot of this, it was just a match that they felt needed a cage, and it didn't really feel all that personal, and it was a typical Hogan match. And Vader really didn't benefit from this feud. We then get to number 61, Rodman and Hogan versus DDP Malone Bash at the Beach 98. I think Rodman was drunk during this, because Malone was inexperienced in the ring. Now, Malone was a really good athlete, but, maybe not the best person outside of the ring. Look it up, kids. But as far as in the ring, this was a big deal. The whole Tonight Show thing. They had a lot of really good shit going. I mean, they did the Tonight Show stuff for Road Wild 98 that led to Jay Leno getting the pinfall to close the WCW pay-per-view, which was really fucking stupid. But at least with this, you had 4 athletes. But Rodman was really goddamn drunk and was botching, and it was something else. And it was long. This was a really, 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 really long match. It was way too long. It should have been maybe at least cut by a third, because even though they're great athletes, Hogan and DDP could only carry it so goddamn much, and Rodman, in the state he was in, was not going to do a very good job, and botching plenty. And Malone, as inexperienced as he was, they needed to keep this short and sweet, and they didn't. And I'm going to crinkle this thing up, because now we're getting to the more praiseworthy stuff. Let's get to number 60. Let's just say with that tag match, as big of a deal as it was for mainstream publicity, it just didn't fire. It wasn't horrible, but it was botch-filled. Number 60, Battle Bowl 93 pay-per-view. It's the Battle Bowl Battle Royal that Vader won, and they were going to have Vader versus Sid. And then Arn and Sid decided to have their violent scissoring incident that led to a whole lot of blood. Just like that time of the month, for some girls that I knew. Moving on from that, that's going to get me a whole lot of hate. This was not a very good pay-per-view. It was a standalone Battle Bowl pay-per-view, thank fucking Christ. Vader winning was cool, and I didn't mind. I love Battle Royals. I think them and tournaments are my 2 favorite stipulations, because, there's a lot of really good shit you can do. The problem with this is this wasn't a concept that needed a pay-per-view. Thankfully, they got away from that, and thankfully, I think they eliminated Battle Bowl. They did the Battle Bowl ring a little bit later with DDP, but they got away from that concept being like an annual thing, which is good, because it was kind of shit, even though Vader won and then would face Flair in a much, 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 much better match than Vader and Sid would have been at Starrcade. I love Sid. I do not think that match would have been very good. So we get to number 59. It's going to be Luger versus Simmons, 2 out of 3 falls, WCW Championship match, Halloween Havoc 91. Now, it wasn't bad. There were good moments here. They wanted to push Ron Simmons. They wanted to keep the title on Luger. It was a bit dodgy with some of the, a couple of the false finishes and a couple of the ways they got out of, making Simmons, look like a chump. They wanted to keep the title on Luger, so some of it didn't work, some of it did. But as far as championship matches, Luger was much better as a U.S. champion than he was as a WCW champion. He was much better as a heel, though, and he performed well here, bumping his ass off for Simmons early on, and that way it worked. But there were some moments where you're like, okay, they're kind of fucking shit up here, and maybe, you shouldn't put two guys that have had experience in the ring, but still, there's no fucking leader. And that's why Harley Race was out there. Because Harley Race could at least, tell Luger, hey, you need to do this and then this, and, do this kind of stuff. Kind of like shout at him, tell him what to do, without exposing the fact that Luger got it as a heel, but still wasn't quite there as a main eventer. Still not a bad match, though. Better than, thank God they did not have the Chamber of Horrors match, close the goddamn show. Could you imagine that? That would have probably been one of the worst pay-per-view main events. God damn. Number 58, Hogan versus Giant. God damn it. Was it the Thunder Cage? It was some kind of steel cage thing that they did. I think it was actually a steel cage. But it was Super Brawl 6. This is where Hogan was getting booed a lot. Now, this was a little bit better than the Vader one because the championship wasn't on the line. Flair had the championship. He had beaten Savage to Starrcade 95. But it's just, Hogan getting booed massively was actually pretty damn good. Because it proved that, Hogan, you either need to change, evolve your character. The fans aren't buying into it. And sure, you could argue that, maybe just certain crowds will boo Hogan. They'll cheer the heels anyway. But no, they were pretty much booing this match in general. Like, they were kind of shitting on it. I can't say it was the worst cage match that I'd seen, because there were plenty others I had talked about. But this was still, it was okay. It had its moments, but just something about it just didn't quite fire. And that's why it's kept out of the top, the top 50 something. Because there's only so much. There was so much you can do with, Hogan at that stage, and then the Giant when he was that inexperienced. He was just in the infancy of his goddamn career, and now feels like he's been around for about 20,000 years. Now we get to number 57, Sting versus Savage, WCW Championship, Spring Stampede 1998. Okay, Sting won at a Starrcade. It got held up because of a fluky thing on the next Nitro, and then he won the vacant championship of Super Brawl 8, effectively killing off anything that Sting could have ever done. And now we have Sting, who had, helped Savage out, or tried to help Savage out at the previous pay-per-view, get beat up, and then we had this match where Savage won and then dropped it to Hogan because he suffered a knee injury, and then Hogan beat him the next night, which is great. It's pretty sad that Savage's first reign was his longest reign, and it was only like, God, what was it, like 35 days? I think it was like 30 days. It was not very goddamn long. It was a real shame. Savage never got to have a long, somewhat dominant run. He never even got to have a run that equaled his second WWE Championship, reign from Mania 8 to like just after SummerSlam 92, which wasn't a ton of time, but was still better than his 3 combined reigns as WCW Champion. I mean, I just don't fucking understand why they did this to Savage. I just don't. And he beat Sting, but it was, via bullshit and everything. It was really bad. It didn't do anything for Savage. It didn't do anything for Sting. Sting was fucking cooled up by this point. He had to be a goddamn Wolfpack member. After fighting against the NWO, he joins them. And that just basically meant that WCW were a bunch of chumps. Which by this point, in 98, they were kind of a bunch of chumps. Even though the reigns are close, they were losing. And they were going to lose handily very soon. Number 56, we get Hogan versus Flair, WCW title, Super Brawl 9. Oh boy, they did this thing with David Flair. They did the thing with David Flair. Remember that? Remember when they brought David Flair in? They tried to make this NWO, this new NWO nucleus, like the nucleus world order, if you will. All vicious, and Flair is supposed to be sympathetic, and then by the next pay-per-view, he was just insane president for life guy that made the First Blood barbed wire cage match all in his favor, and he won and then lost the championship a month later. Remember all that bad booking? They did a whole bunch of shit with David Flair and all this stuff, and god damn, it was so fucking bad. These guys just being in any kind of match at this, no, it was not good. The championship picture was dominated by these guys. I can't even say it was the worst, so it sounds like I'm really crapping on this, and I should have rated it lower, but it's like the thing where there's so much shit at the bottom that some stuff rises above the shit, so it's shit, but it's not the stinkiest shit, so that's kind of what this was. This match was pretty shit, but it had a funny quality about it, and you could tell at least at one point they were trying, and then they just fucking gave up. Because, they're being paid guaranteed money to stand out there and basically do the same goddamn thing, so that's pretty much what they did, and yeah, all the fluky shit, it was really fucking bad. Number 55, Stud Stable versus Dusty Rhodes' team. So Stud Stable had to go to cheat sheet, from Fall Brawl 94, it's the War Games. Stud Stable was Colonel Rob Parker, Bunkhouse Terry Funk, Arn Anderson versus Dustin Rhodes, and the Nasty Boys. And apparently the rumor is, and I don't know if it's actually true, but it kind of would make sense for, like, some of the reactions, that Rob Parker may have actually shit himself during this. And if he did, I feel bad for the guy. I don't know if he actually did. But it was during, I think it was like during the closing moments where Dusty got the figure 4 on him. But yeah, this wasn't necessarily the best War Games. It was a pretty basic one. It was still a little bit better than the Hogan one, because at least with this, War Games kind of still felt special, and you could get some good with these components, you could get something good out of it. And at least Dustin belonged in War Games. Dusty at that point, goddamn, Dusty shouldn't have been in the ring, not in '94. But Terry Funk and Bunkhouse Buck were a pretty, formidable team, especially Terry Funk, because Terry Funk's insane. Former WCW Hardcore Champion in 2000. How fucking sad is that? But this was fine. It wasn't the best War Games match, but at least it was better than it was. We then get Sting and Bulldog, Dustin Shockmaster, not Dustin Shockmaster, but Dustin and the Shockmaster, versus Vader, Sid, and Harlem Heat. War Games match, Fall Brawl '93. They were known as Kane and Cole, not Booker and Stevie Ray. That's where we were at this point. The Shockmaster, by the way, after falling flat on his ass, according to the Bulldog, on the Flair for the Golden, Ole Anderson cracking up, trying to do the voice for the Shockmaster. Essentially, they made the Shockmaster bumbling, but he managed to get the win here. Tapping out or not tapping out one of the Harlem Heat members, and it made no sense. It was fucking weird, and I don't fucking understand what the fuck was going on here, because it was so fucking bizarre. It was really fucking bizarre. But it was a little bit better than the Stud Stable one. Not, again, by much. You probably could have flipped these, and it wouldn't have really mattered. But it was cool to see Sting and it was cool to see Bulldog in a War Games match. It was the only War Games match he'd be involved in, because he'd be involved at Fall Brawl, '98, that had a War Games match. Nope, the aforementioned trap door that I talked about on a previous one was... check out the previous part if you want to hear me rant about the trapdoor thing and the bullshit, and whoever didn't tell Bulldog about that's a fucking idiot and should have been, fucking sued for putting their wrestlers in that kind of danger. But anyway, that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. It wasn't a bad War Games match, but you could have flipped these and it wouldn't have mattered. We then get to Giant versus Sting, WCW Championship, Slamboree 96. Okay, so Luger's trying to help Sting out because he's trying to help him out, and ends up whacking him with the megaphone, and that ends up, knocking Sting out, and Giant gets the victory. And then Giant faces Luger at the next pay-per-view. I'll talk about here in a little bit. This wasn't a bad match. Sting and Giant actually had pretty damn good chemistry, as opposed to Giant and Hogan. But I don't know, just it felt like the finish kind of killed it, though. They had to find a way to keep Sting strong, make it seem like, Luger might turn to the dark side again. Maybe there's still dissension. But it was Luger trying to help out his friend, and he basically ended up knocking him out. It wasn't a terrible match. And again, Sting and Giant would always have really good chemistry. Parts of it worked. Finish kind of killed it, but it wasn't bad. We then get to number 52, DDP versus Scott Steiner, Falls Count Anywhere match, WCW Championship, Greed 2001. The final WCW pay-per-view main event of WCW, not of this list. It would be weird if I just ended it right there, and that was the best one with totally ignoring the rest of them, because that's not how lists work. This, at least they went out with a bang. I mean, I don't mean bada bang, how DDP does the diamond cutter thing. I'm going to do it like that because I know he's got the shit trademarked. But him and Scott Steiner had a really good personal, smash mouth match here. No, I don't mean hang on, you're an all-star, hey now, you're an all-star, or just an average, ordinary, generic movie theme song. I don't mean like that. I mean, as far as having just a smash mouth match here, which I would have liked to have seen the lead singer of Smash Mouth be part of a wrestling match, but no, after some of the bullshit he did in Sturgis, no, that guy can fuck off. This was at least a well-worked match. Now, yes, you did have the usual bullshit and stuff, but as far as a final pay-per-view match, what a hell of a way to go out. And DDP and Scott Steiner, they swung for the fences, and may not have been a home run, but it was pretty damn good, all things considered. And Scott Steiner went and dropped it to Booker T on the final Nitro a little bit later. 51, Hogan, Savage versus Flair and Vader, Slamboree 95. Okay, so we just can't get these four away from each other. They feuded for seemingly 18 years. Because Flair worked with Savage and Hogan so much on pay-per-view. It was like they were in bed together. It was almost like an abridged version of Bockwinkel and Vern Gagne. Except Savage was, in the role of Bockwinkel because Bockwinkel was better than Vern Gagne in the ring. Oh, I probably have disturbed some people and some wrestling purists there. But I'm sticking to it. About Bockwinkel as a main eventer, or as, a long-term champion more than Gagne, because Gagne owned the goddamn territory. Moving on from that, enough AWA history, even though AWA has been dead since 1991. And probably should have been dead by 87. Hogan and Savage end up, of course, beating Flair and Vader, because why the fuck wouldn't they beat Flair and Vader? Because Hogan always has to have the wins, and Savage has to basically be effectively, overshadowed by Hogan, and it's fucking revolting. It wasn't a bad match. It was actually pretty damn decent overall. It got some good time, but Flair and Vader were kind of made to look like goofs once again. Number 50, Dusty vs. Flair NWA Championship, Starrcade 1984. This one's ranked a lot lower than people might have thought, and I'm going to explain why. Yeah, Joe Frazier, I'm going to get Joe Frazier, who was the special guest referee. And I respect what Joe Frazier did, but he was a referee that was supposed to make sure he calls it down the middle, and it's an old thing they did in the territories where various boxers where, former boxers or, past their prime boxers were referees, and people still believed it because they had such a dominant run in their career. And, they're not going to take any shit. They're not going to be like these other referees. They're going to keep the law in order going. And Joe Frazier did a good job here, but this was billed as the $1 Million Challenge, The Gathering, SmackDown, or no, wait, was it The Gathering? It was The Gathering for Starrcade, not SmackDown. But Dusty had a cut over his eye, and they basically called it, I think, after 12 and a half minutes. That kind of killed it. Now, Starrcade 84 was a bit of a misfire. It had its moments, but it wasn't great. And the ending of this wasn't all that great. Yes, you didn't want Dusty to be beat straight up. But the way they did it, it didn't work here. I mean, it sort of worked with Lawler and Von Erich a little bit later. But it didn't really work here. It kind of seemed like a cop-out. Starrcade 85 would be much better, and I'll talk about that, later in the show. Not this show, but later in the list. But at least it was a good Starrcade main event, but also a bit of a downer just because of the end. We think it's number 49, Luger vs. Savage, sold out 98. Okay, so Hogan versus Sting was the main event. Titles held up, and this is what we got for the main event. Now, don't get me wrong, Luger and Savage had good matches on occasion. They had a rivalry going all the way back to 1995 when Hogan, was like, oh, Savage, you can trust him. Well, I don't trust him. And that was the best Savage impression I could do. I apologize. But they had an on-again, off-again thing, and it made sense. But this just also seemed kind of a little bit thrown together here. Because they were like, well, shit, we don't have a championship match. Luger, Savage, go out and main event this. Okay, but the crowd doesn't half care. Well, go do it anyway. And that's what they did. And it was an adequate match. It was well wrestled. I didn't necessarily care. It was one of the least investing main events that they've done. But they were still trying to keep Luger hot at this point. Savage had just come off that tremendous run working with DDP. And a lot of really good goddamn matches. The feud of 1997, in my personal opinion. Up there only with maybe Brett and Austin. And even then, DDP and Savage sails well above it because it was really fucking good. But yeah, Luger and Savage, bit of an odd main event, but good match. But hard to get invested in. And then we go to the Horseman versus Team NWO. Fall Brawl 97. Back to Cheat Sheet time. Horseman, Flair, Bongo, Benoit, and Kurt Hennig because Arn Anderson had to retire. versus Team NWO, Nash, Buff Bagwell, Conan, and Six. Okay, not exactly a landmark team there, but whatever. All this is remembered for is Fall Brawl 97, by the way, in a War Games. The only thing that people remember about this is Henning turned on the Horseman, which we knew he was going to do. He was injured, but he got in anyway. And then he had stuff in his sling and then beat the shit out of everybody. And that was it. That was pretty much the end of the match right there. And then Sting, or not Sting, I mean, Sting wouldn't really show up, but it was like Flair got a stinging pain in his head when he got the cage slammed into it. And that was about it. That was they would feud a little bit longer, but then Flair would be out for a bit and then would be off TV for a while, and they really never knew what the fuck to do with Flair later in the decade, did they? I didn't want him main eventing. I also didn't want him working the goddamn, third match on a 10-match show. It just didn't make sense. You could put him in competent, well put together feuds if WCW had anybody competent working in the company, and they really fucking didn't, at least nobody in charge. But at least with this, it made sense with Henning doing it, but overall, it was a good War Games. It was certainly better than a few of the others I mentioned, but it wasn't a great one. Now move on to the final one. It's going to be number 47, Flair versus Luger, WCW title in a cage, Capital Combat 1990. The return of RoboCop, and look, it wasn't good. Ole Anderson controlling the cage and the Horseman getting in. Oh no, we have to get to Ole and get the cage up, and Elegante and everybody are here, and we've already made everybody look stupid running away from RoboCop, but let's get everybody in here. Was Elegante there at that point? Somebody was there. Everything gets kind of messy at this point, but yeah, Sting had to get to his buddy, even though Sting was injured and was going to come back and face Flair at Great American Bash 1990 that I will talk about in a very praiseworthy fashion. But this was just not good. It just wasn't. And it was well worked for a Flair Luger match. But the problem is, this was the least of the pay-per-view matches that they had, and it just overall didn't fire. And as far as Capital Combat, really shitty pay-per-view, and didn't work overall. But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.